Hey, I'm Sanjana. Today we're going to be doing a walkthrough on session level evaluations. I'm going to be focusing on how to do this in Arize with the Python SDK. There will also be a follow-up video to this on how to run this in the UI, but for now let's focus on, what a session is and what exactly session level evaluations can do for you. So typically when we run evaluations, we're doing that at the span level. So we look at a tool call and say, was that tool call correct? Maybe you're evaluating for parameters, like did your agent pass in the right parameters to the tool. You can also look at things like specific LLM calls and say, did the LLM hallucinate, maybe retrieval, all sorts of things. A session takes the building blocks that you're already familiar with, so traces and spans, and connects them with a session ID. This is important to do if you have some sort of related interaction or a conversation. Think about if you're using a customer service chatbot online, all of your different messages between you and the chatbot can be collected into a session. So a session is just a group of related traces. Instead of focusing on one isolated trace or one isolated message, we get a holistic view at a multi-turn conversation. So I drew up this quick example of what a session might look like to really hone in the idea of how this works. So each one of these little boxes that are saying human chatbot represent a trace. And every span within those traces has this session ID of 999 tied to it. This allows us to, group all these interactions together and tells us, okay, these are all part of this session. So first the human goes in and says, I want to buy a truck, what's available? The chatbot, responds to that. Maybe it does some things on the side over here. It does a tool call, database query, some LLM calls. It returns and says, here is what is available. This entire interaction here represents one trace. And then the human responds and says, can you compare truck X and truck Y? Chatbot does a similar thing. Maybe this time it does some RAG, some LLM calls, tool calls, comes back with a comparison of truck X and truck Y. Again, this is one trace. And now that this conversation has terminated, maybe the human says, I'm done here. We can, go into our spans and traces, connect all of these by a session ID, and now we've constructed a session. Arize does all of that collection and concatenation of these traces and spans for you in the UI itself, which is really great. I have a couple more pictures and diagrams at the bottom here. So again, this is just exactly nailing on the idea that I was talking about before. We have this session here. It has trace 1 that has a tool call, an LLM tool call, same thing with trace 2. But if you look at how this is actually constructed, each one of these spans over here, like the tool call, the LLM, have this same session ID correlated with it. And then you have each of your spans there underneath it. And finally, I mentioned that in the Arize UI, you can see your sessions. So if you click into your project, go to the Sessions tab, you'll see something like this over here, where you have your session conversation. So this is just another human and chatbot interaction about planning a trip to Paris. You see each one of your traces on the side here. So each one of these boxes represents a trace. You have all your trace information. Arize is able to grab those messages and display them to you like this. So you can really, visually see a conversation happening. So now that we've kind of talked about what a session is, let's talk about what that unlocks for evaluations. Now that you have a multi-turn conversation, you're able to start answering questions like, did the user reach its goal? Was the chatbot giving the user accurate information based on what the user was asking throughout the entire conversation? Was the user frustrated by the end of the conversation? Things like that you can't really get on a span level because the information is too isolated, you can get in session level evaluations. So let's jump into the code and I will show you how you can do this with a AI tutor use case. So before we jump into the code, I actually just want to take a second to talk about how we group traces together. Up until this point, I've been saying, use a session ID. You can also use a user ID in order to do this. So if I make my user ID Sanjana, we can group together all the traces that have my user ID attached to it, and it'll represent my entire conversation with the chatbot. In Arize, we do this using a context manager from Open Inference Instrumentation. So let's start with session ID. So using session is a pretty common way to go about this. We have this with clause over here that takes in the session ID, and then your code will follow this, and all the spans generated will have the session ID attached to it. And then you can also use this as a decorator. And then same thing with using user. So this is the exact same thing that happened over here, except we will be passing in a user ID, and all the spans generated will have that user ID attached. In our example today, we will actually be using attributes, which takes in a session ID and a user ID. You can use using attributes with one or the other, but I'll be using both in this case just to demonstrate that you can narrow sessions down by an ID and by the user, because our use case is a AI tutor that I mentioned earlier. We'll be passing in the student name as a user ID. So now we're actually ready to jump into the code. Now we're in our notebook. I already went ahead and did some setup here around installing necessary packages, bringing in my Arize credentials like my API key and my space ID. Next thing we have to do is configure tracing. I'm going to be using Anthropic models today, so I brought in the necessary open inference package there, and I'm using my register function to configure tracing. Let's run that. Bam, that's done. Okay, so now we're ready to actually build and run our AI tutor. So we need to generate sessions in order to do session level evals. So that's what this first step is over here. Just to quickly run you through what this is doing, we have this function run session over here. I have some prompts that kind of configure my AI tutor, tell it to ask questions, give hints to the student. You can really customize this part to be whatever you want. And then I have this loop that runs until the student determines that it's done. And we use that using attributes context manager over there, and this passes in the session ID, which I define up here, and then user ID, which goes into the overall run session function itself. So this is where the student just indicates who they are. And then we do some, different parsing of messages, and we also say, if the student is done, we end the session. We let the student know that they can type done after every message that the chatbot sends. And if we hit that, the conversation's over. And what we're also doing up here is just separating student messages from AI messages, so we can correctly construct that conversation of like human chatbot, like we saw earlier. So we can run that, and then we can actually give this a go. I'll do one together just so I can show you what this looks like, and then I will run this a couple more times so we have a couple sessions to evaluate. Let's run this, and what do we see? I'll help you explore what a parabola is. Oh yeah, I asked what is a parabola, and I said the subject was math. I'm the student. So it just says some things like, have you ever seen the path that a ball makes? Some examples. Can you tell me what you already know about parabolas or what you think they might be? I'm going to say, I don't know anything. So that's okay. Let's start from the beginning. This is really nice. The tutor is asking me some questions. Have you ever seen the shape y equals x squared? I'll give it the right answer this time. Let's say B. And then, as you can imagine, this conversation will just keep going. For the sake of time, I'm just going to hit done instead of like following up with more questions here. And then we see the student is done, ending session. Cool. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to do a bunch more of these just so we can generate more traces, more sessions. I'm going to ask it different types of questions, and then we'll come back and begin the evaluation process. Okay, I'm back. I've run this a couple times at this point. I asked a science question, an English question. My last one here was history. Each time I kept my user ID the same, but as you can see, how this works is every time the function is run, we generate a new session ID, and then that new session ID is passed in along with my user ID of Sanjana, and because of that, we get a new session every time this runs because the session ID is different, even though the user ID is the same. So those two have to match when you use using attributes in order for the spans to go to the same conversation every time. So now we're ready to prepare our spans for session level evaluation. The first thing that we need to do is actually grab our spans, put them in a data frame. So we're going to be doing that by using the Arize expert client, and our model ID, which we defined above, actually takes in our project name. So this is just going to grab all the spans from that project, and then I have my start time and end time to be like 7 days. So like everything that I just ran is going to come up right now. Okay, cool. That's done. And then if we just look at what that data frame looks like, we have all the different spans. We can see that, like our LLM providers there, our user ID is all the same. It was all me. And our session ID. So you can see like these first 3 have the same session ID. These next 3 are the same. These next 4 have the same session ID. These have the same session ID, and so on. That's how these spans are going to be grouped together by looking at that feature there. Because my user ID is the same in this case, I'm going to collapse spans into a single row per session using the session ID itself. and then I'm going to separate out the user messages from the AI messages, and then I'm going to sort them by time so we have all of our spans in order. So that's exactly what this code is doing over here. So we can see that what we're doing is we're ending with a data frame that has the session ID, all the user inputs, and they are sorted by start time. And then we have all the output messages also sorted by start time. And then we just have a trace count for how many traces were in that conversation in that session. So run that, cool. And then we see what that looks like now. So I ran that function up there 4 times. I had 4 different sessions. There we go, that's seen over here. And we can see we have the user messages separated from the output messages. This is going to help us, just run evaluations properly, because as you'll see in our evaluation templates, we will pass in the user inputs and the output messages separately so that we can evaluate how the chatbot is actually responding to what the user is saying. Now that we've parsed our data frame nice and neatly, we're actually ready to begin our evaluations. We'll be doing a series of evaluations on these sessions, so let's jump into the first one, which is session correctness eval. What this is doing, pretty straightforward, is evaluating the correctness and the educational quality of the AI tutor. So I have some criteria here to call out a little bit. It's saying, all the explanations should be factual and conceptually accurate. You should actually be responding to the student question, clarifying any misunderstandings, that sort of thing. And we take in the user input and the output messages, and the goal of this evaluator is to just respond with a correct or incorrect based on the quality of the AI tutor's responses. So we run this template, and then in Arize, we do evaluations using Phoenix evals. So I'm going to import LLM classify, which allows us to do LLM as a judge. I'm also going to import Anthropic model because we'll be using this model over here to actually run our evaluation. This is different from the model that we use to actually generate the original traces. And we just specify our rails to be correct or incorrect. And yeah, we're ready to run this. This is just your classic LLM as a judge function. This eval has finished running. Let's actually just take a look at what we get from this. So eval results correctness, we don't need all that. We run this, and we can see that for each one of our sessions, we get an explanation of correct or incorrect. All of these were deemed to be correct, and we also just get more metadata about the status, how long it took, tokens, all of that. So we're just going to continue on with this. And the next evaluation that we can look at a more holistic level is session frustration. Was the student, frustrated with the AI tutor? We're saying I don't get it, this doesn't make sense, maybe disagreeing with the tutor's response or saying these explanations aren't great. This is an important evaluation you can do with conversations, not just in this use case. But this one's pretty important, pretty generalized, making sure that the user's happy with the experience of the conversation it's part of. So run that, and then same exact thing before. We're going to use LLM classify, specify our rails as frustrated or not frustrated, pass in our sessions data frame, and we can run this. Okay, this has finished its run. We can see the results once again over here, and we can move on to session goal achievement. So by the end of the session, did the AI tutor actually answer the student question properly, and did the student walk away with the proper knowledge that he or she needs? And there's some more specifications in this, did the student's inputs indicate understanding or closure by the end? Was the conversation logical? Did the AI tutor address the student's questions and requests directly, or did it take the student on an unnecessary path? We can see that through this eval over here. Let's run this, and then once again our LLM classify function, exactly the same as before. This time our rails are achieved and not achieved, so we'll be able to just classify that in each one of these categories. Okay, we can see that for all of these, this is saying not achieved because I didn't, have a really full conversation with these AI tutors. I just asked a couple questions and then said I was done. And that was the evaluation I was expecting to see over here. So that's good to know. And finally, now that we've run all these evals in code, you can add as many of these as you want here. These LLM as a judge templates are very customizable to whatever your session eval use case is. At this point, we probably want to log our evaluations back to Arize so that we can have them, saved somewhere. You can also see them in the UI nice and neatly. This requires a little bit of parsing at this point. So we take each of our evaluation result data frames, we grab the labels and the explanations, and we combine all of those over here. What this code up here was just doing is a lot of, grabbing and renaming certain columns. Because if you recall, in these over here, we had a lot of metadata, but we really only want to grab the label and the explanation. And then what we do is we merge all of our evaluation labels and explanations together, and we grab the root span of the session, So what this means is that in the sessions, you'll have one trace that, begins it. It's your first trace. And then we want to grab the first span in that first trace and attach the evaluation onto that. So this over here is just grabbing all of our root spans, and then we attach all the evaluations onto that root span over here. And then finally, we use the Arize client once again to log evaluations back to Arize, and we specify our project name as model ID over here. So I'm going to run this, and this is saying successfully logged evaluation data to Arize. So let's see now what that looks like. So now we're in the Arize UI, and you can see under my project, my AI tutor, I'm in the sessions tab, and all of those evaluations that I just logged are showing up over here under the evaluations column. At this point, what I can do is click into each one of my sessions. If I want to see maybe why the goal wasn't completed, I can look through all of the messages there, understand what's going wrong. Maybe I can filter out by a certain evaluation result, put those in a data set, make modifications, iterate, all of that. All those workflows that we've talked about in the past are all applicable to sessions over here, and session level evals allow you to do all of that. I hope this video allowed you to understand how session level evals work, why they're important, and how you can easily run these yourself. Like I said earlier, I'll be back with another video shortly on how to do this in the Arize UI. But until then, I just want to thank you for your time and hope you took something away from this.